October 17, 1952, 11:23 p.m. A recording studio, Columbia Records, 799 7th Avenue, New York City. The session has been running since 7 p.m. 4 hours and 23 minutes of what every person in the room, the engineers, the session musicians, the A&R representative sitting in the back with his jacket over his arm, privately knows is the worst recording session Frank Sinatra has had in 5 years, possibly in 10. It is not the voice. The voice is still there, diminished, yes, rougher at the edges, carrying in its grain the accumulated damage of a year that has taken things from him that voices do not easily recover from. But it is still, unmistakably, Frank Sinatra's voice. The problem is not the voice. The problem is the material. The problem is the arrangement. The problem is that Columbia Records has been giving Frank Sinatra material that was designed with the particular bureaucratic cowardice of institutions in decline, not to succeed but to fail on terms that could be documented. The problem is that the man sitting in the back with his jacket over his arm, Mitch Miller, Columbia's head of A&R, the man who turned folk singers into pop stars, and who has spent the better part of 2 years methodically dismantling the architecture of Frank Sinatra's recorded career, has been winning. Bim Bam Baby. That was the song. That was the song Columbia Records gave Frank Sinatra in 1952 to record. Bim Bam Baby. The man who recorded I've Got You Under My Skin. The man whose version of September Song made radio programmers cry in their offices. The man who turned All or Nothing at All into the anthem of an entire generation of young Americans who went to war and didn't come back, and whose sweethearts played that record until it wore down to silence. Bim Bam Baby. At 11:23 p.m., between takes, Frank Sinatra sets down his headphones. He walks out of the vocal booth. He does not say anything dramatic. He does not slam a door. He walks to the water cooler in the corner of the control room, pours a paper cup of water, drinks it, and sets the cup down. He looks at Mitch Miller. Mitch Miller looks back at him. Two men who have understood each other perfectly for 18 months, who have never needed to make their understanding explicit, who have been conducting a war in the specific language of song selection and arrangement choices and scheduling decisions. They look at each other. "I'm done for tonight," Sinatra says. "Frank, we still have 3 tracks. I'm done for tonight." He picks up his jacket from the chair. He takes his hat from the hook by the door. He walks to the elevator. The session musicians exchange glances. The engineers exchange glances. Mitch Miller stands with his clipboard and the particular expression of a man who has gotten what he wanted and is not quite comfortable enough with it to show satisfaction. The elevator opens. Sinatra steps in. The doors close. In the elevator, going down, Frank Sinatra is alone for 32 floors. He stands with his jacket over his arm and his hat in his hand, and he looks at the closed elevator doors, and he thinks. He is 36 years old. He has been the most famous entertainer in America. He has sold more records than any singer of his generation. He has made films. He has performed for presidents. The Bobby Soxers who screamed for him at the Paramount in 1942 are now in their late 20s with children of their own, and the memory of that screaming has become the kind of memory you don't talk about because it reveals too much about the person you were. And tonight, in October of 1952, the arithmetic of his position looks like this. Columbia Records is preparing to drop him. The contract runs through the end of the year and will not be renewed. He knows this. Mitch Miller knows this. The man with the clipboard has been engineering this outcome for 24 months with the patient, systematic competence of someone who has decided that Frank Sinatra's brand of music is not the future and who has been making his case in the only language that matters to record companies: sales figures. His film career at MGM has ended. The studio declined to renew. The roles he has been offered since, the ones his agent has been sending over with decreasing enthusiasm, are the roles you offer a man when you want him to say no. His marriage to Nancy is over. His marriage to Ava Gardner, which began with the specific, combustible, self-destroying love of two people who are absolutely wrong for each other in every way that matters and absolutely necessary to each other in the ways that don't, is in the process of becoming something else. He does not yet know what. His vocal cords have hemorrhaged twice in the past year. The first time, he lost his voice entirely for weeks. When it came back different. Not worse, not better, but different. More wear, more grain. The voice of a man who has survived something. He does not know yet that the survival and the grain and the difference will be the foundation of the greatest artistic achievement of his life. He does not know yet that the man who walks out of this elevator tonight will, in 3 years, record In the Wee Small Hours and change the architecture of American music permanently. He does not know that the loss of the pretty voice is the beginning of the great voice. He knows only 13 people, 13 significant people in the architecture of his professional life have, in the past 12 months, stepped back, stepped away, declined to return calls, made other arrangements. 13 people who, in better years, would have described themselves as allies. They have not said, "We're leaving." Nobody ever says that. They have simply become unavailable. They have become busy. They have become the specific kind of distant that is indistinguishable from absence. And Frank Sinatra, riding the elevator down 32 floors in a building he may never enter professionally again, does what he has always done in the moments of maximum pressure. He gets quiet, not sad quiet, not defeated quiet, the other kind. The elevator opens on the lobby. He walks across the lobby. He pushes through the revolving door onto 7th Avenue. The October night is cold and full of traffic and the particular indifferent noise of a city that does not stop its business for any one man's difficulty. He stands on the sidewalk. He looks at the street. He looks at his watch. It is 11:31 p.m. He puts on his hat. He walks to the phone booth on the corner of 52nd Street. He picks up the receiver. He deposits a dime. He dials the first number. The 90 minutes begin now. To understand what Frank Sinatra does between 11:31 p.m. and 1:01 a.m. on October 17th and 18th, 1952, you must first understand what 1952 is. Not the historical 1952, the Eisenhower election, Korea, the early Cold War, the personal 1952. The specific geography of a year that has taken a man who was, by any measurement, at the apex of his field in 1947 and applied to him a sustained, systemic, multi-directional pressure that has cracked things that seemed permanent. The 13 people, let us be specific about them, because specificity is the only honesty available, are not enemies. This is the part that the simplified version of this story always gets wrong. They are not villains. They are not men who woke up in 1952 and decided to destroy Frank Sinatra. They are something more mundane and more devastating. They are pragmatists. They are people who have looked at the numbers, the record sales declining, the film grosses declining, the booking fees declining, and who have made the calculation that proximity to Frank Sinatra in his current condition is more liability than asset. They have not abandoned him with malice. They have abandoned him with spreadsheets, and the spreadsheets are not wrong. The numbers are genuinely bad. Columbia's last 3 Sinatra releases have underperformed. The Bobby Soxers have moved on, to Johnny Ray, to Eddie Fisher, to the new sounds of a music industry that is reorienting itself around a younger audience and doesn't yet know that Frank Sinatra is going to be the one who shows them what the adult audience sounds like when it's given music worth listening to. The 13 are Mitch Miller, Columbia A&R chief, who has systematically given Sinatra material designed to fail. Lou Wasserman of MCA, Sinatra's primary agent, who is no longer pursuing film roles with previous urgency, not abandoning, deprioritizing, which in the mathematics of Hollywood is the same thing. Dor Shari, head of production at MGM, who has decided Sinatra is not MGM's future. George Evans, his longtime press representative, who has died, 1950, heart attack, 48 years old, and whose death left a publicity apparatus that has not been adequately replaced, leaving Sinatra exposed to press coverage that he and Evans would have managed more skillfully. Ben Barton, his music publisher, who is quietly moving the firm's promotional investment toward newer acts. Jimmy Van Huysen, his closest songwriter, who is still his friend, but who has, in 1952, been writing for other performers with an urgency that the previous years did not require. Bill Miller, his pianist, who is loyal, but who has been receiving calls from other principals. Hank Sanicola, his manager, who is loyal, but running out of strategies. And 5 others, a film producer, a radio executive, a nightclub owner, a New York journalist whose column could help, and a record distributor whose enthusiasm for promoting Sinatra's product has visibly cooled. 13 people, not enemies, pragmatists. And tonight, on a sidewalk in the October rain, Frank Sinatra has decided that pragmatism is not the only available response to his situation. He has decided on something else. He has decided on memory. Because here is the thing about Frank Sinatra that the 13 pragmatists have temporarily forgotten. He has spent 20 years building relationships that are not merely transactional. He has spent 20 years attending funerals and weddings and hospital rooms. He has spent 20 years tipping extravagantly and remembering birthdays and calling people when they were in trouble and showing up at 3 a.m. with a bottle of whiskey and the specific quiet of a man who knows that sometimes the only help available is presence. The 13 have run their spreadsheets on the professional relationship. They have not run their spreadsheets on the human one. And on the human spreadsheet, the one that counts favors and loyalty and the specific debt that accumulates when a man has been genuinely present in your life for 20 years, Frank Sinatra is not overdrawn. He is, in fact, the most solvent man in any room he has ever entered. He just needs 90 minutes to prove it. He does not make all 13 calls in 90 minutes. This is not how it works. This is not how it has ever worked. What he does in 90 minutes is something more surgical. He identifies, with the precision of a man who has been conducting this specific analysis for months without acknowledging it even to himself, the 3 pivot points, the 3 people and 3 decisions that, if moved in the right direction, will create the chain reaction that reverses the current direction of his professional trajectory. Not all 13 problems need to be solved tonight. Perhaps not all 13 problems can ever be fully solved. Some of the 13 are already gone in ways that are structural and permanent, and not about Frank Sinatra personally. Dore Sherry's MGM is entering a period of institutional decline that will destroy it, regardless of what any single performer does. The radio landscape is changing in ways that no amount of phone calls can redirect. But 3 things, 3 specific, achievable, precisely identified things can be moved tonight. And Frank Sinatra, standing in the phone booth on 52nd Street with the October rain running down the glass, knows exactly what they are. He has known, actually, for longer than tonight. The analysis has been running in the background for months, behind the performances and the recording sessions and the public face of a man who is handling his difficulties with the equanimity expected of him. The analysis has been running, and the conclusions have been sitting in the vault of his most private thinking, waiting for the moment when he is willing to act on them. Tonight is that moment. Not because the recording session was the breaking point. Recording sessions have been bad before and will be bad again. Tonight is that moment because he is 36 years old and he has been the most famous entertainer in America, and he is standing in a phone booth in the October rain, and he is not going to stand here and be finished. He is not going to be finished. He deposits the dime. He dials. 11:31 p.m. The phone booth at 52nd and 7th. The first call is to Ava Gardner. Not because she is the most strategically important call, not because she is the solution to the professional problems. She is, in most conventional analyses, part of the problem. Their relationship has cost him press goodwill, has fed the narrative of Sinatra in decline, has provided the gossip columnists with the ammunition that has been used against him all year. He calls her first because she is the one person who will understand what tonight was, and because he has learned, 36 years into this life, that the first thing you do before you build anything is speak to someone who knows your actual dimensions, not your public dimensions. Your actual ones. She picks up on the second ring. She knows his call. How was the session? Over, he says. A silence. Ava Gardner is many things that have been written about extensively. She is also, in her private communications, a woman of absolute directness. Over, as in tonight. Or over, as in both, he says. A longer silence. Then, what are you going to do? I'm going to make some calls. Frank, I know what I have. I know who I need to talk to. I just needed to... I know, she says. Call me after. He hangs up. 22 seconds. He deposits another dime. He dials the second number. 11:36 p.m. The second call is to Jules Stein. Jules Stein is the founder of MCA, the Music Corporation of America, which is, by 1952, the most powerful talent agency in the entertainment industry. He is not Sinatra's direct agent, that is, Lou Wasserman, who works for Stein. But Stein is the man who built the machine, and the machine will do what Stein asks it to do. And Stein is a man who has known Frank Sinatra since 1943, who was at the Paramount in '43 when the Bobby Soxers were screaming, and who understood, in that moment, that what he was watching was not a fad, but a force. He also has, in October 1952, a problem that Frank Sinatra is in a position to solve. Jules Stein is 60 years old. He founded MCA as a music booking agency in 1924 and has spent 28 years turning it into the dominant force in American entertainment representation. He has done this through the specific genius of vertical integration. MCA doesn't just represent artists, it packages them, it produces their projects, it controls the landscape in which they operate. The federal government has been watching this with increasing concern, and the antitrust pressure that will eventually force MCA to choose between being an agency and being a production company is building toward the crisis that will arrive in 1962. In 1952, Jules Stein needs something specific. He needs a performer of absolute, undeniable stature to anchor a new television project, a weekly prestige variety program that will establish MCA's television production arm as a serious enterprise. He has been looking for this anchor for 6 months. He has had conversations with 6 performers. None of them are right. Frank Sinatra knows this. He knows it because Jilly Rizzo, who knows everything, mentioned it in passing 3 weeks ago. And Frank Sinatra does not forget things mentioned in passing. He knows something else. He knows that television, in 1952, is considered by most performers of his generation to be the medium of last resort. The place you go when your theatrical career is over, when records aren't selling, when you have run out of other options. He knows that this perception is wrong. He has believed for 2 years that television is not the end of a career, but the beginning of a new architecture for one. He has been unable to convince anyone of this because the perception is so strong. But Jules Stein is not a man who traffics in perception. Jules Stein traffics in architecture. The phone rings 3 times at the Stein residence in Holmby Hills. Jules Stein picks up himself. It is 8:30 p.m. in Los Angeles. He is a man who reads in the evenings. Jules, it's Frank. A pause. Jules Stein's voice, measured, precise, the voice of a man who has never in his adult life had a conversation that didn't have a purpose. Frank, how are you? I'm going to ask you something directly. Go ahead. The television project, the prestige variety hour. You haven't found your anchor. A longer pause. How do you know about that? I know things, Jules. That's what I want to talk about. Frank, I know what people say about television. I know what people say about where I am right now. I want you to consider, very specifically, that both of those pieces of conventional wisdom are wrong. He talks for 8 minutes. He does not pitch himself in the conventional way. He does not list his credits, or cite his sales figures, or make the case for his current marketability, because his current marketability is not the argument. He makes a different argument. He makes the argument about television's future, about where the medium is going, about the specific demographic of the American living room in 1952 and what that demographic will look like in 1955 and 1960. He talks about the difference between an audience that chooses to go to a theater and an audience that invites you into their home, and what that intimacy requires from a performer, and why the performers who will win on television are not the ones who are already winning in theaters. He talks, in other words, the way a man talks when he has been thinking about something serious for a long time and has finally found the right person to say it to. Jules Stein listens without interrupting. When Sinatra finishes, there is a silence of approximately 6 seconds. "You want to meet this week?" Stein says. "Thursday," Sinatra says. "Thursday at 10, my office." He hangs up. He looks at his watch. 11:49 p.m., 18 minutes. He deposits another dime. Before the third call, we should understand the full map of what Sinatra has been working with tonight. The 13 who have stepped back are those who have stepped back for structural reasons. The industry is changing, the music is changing, and their distance from Sinatra is not personal but architectural. For these, there is no call to make. The architecture will change again. His job is to survive until it does. Those who have stepped back for perceptual reasons, they believe the conventional narrative of Sinatra in decline, and their belief is sincere and not unreasonable given the available evidence. For these, the call is not about argument, the call is about demonstration. Sinatra cannot convince these people with words. He can only convince them by building something that makes the argument for itself. And those, the small and critical number, who have stepped back not because they believe he is finished, but because the cost of their continued proximity has risen and the benefit has declined. These are the ones who respond to a changed calculation. These are the ones who can be moved, tonight, by a phone call that changes the numbers. Jules Stein is one of these. The third pivot point is another, 11:52 p.m. The third call is the one that takes the most courage, not physical courage. Frank Sinatra is not short of physical courage, as anyone who has seen him in a room where something required it will confirm. This is a different kind, the courage of a man who must call someone he has hurt and ask for something. The call is to James Petrillo. James Caesar Petrillo is the president of the American Federation of Musicians, the most powerful musicians' union in the world. He is 61 years old. He has been president of the AFM since 1940. He is a man of considerable force and, in his specific professional domain, of absolute authority. He has, in the past, been a significant ally of Sinatra, not because of any personal warmth between them, but because of structural alignment. Sinatra's insistence on live musicians in his recording sessions, his public advocacy for union musicians, his refusal to use technology as a replacement for human performance, all of these have made him, in Petrillo's world, a useful public figure. In 1952, the relationship is strained. It is strained because of the Frank Sinatra Show on CBS, a television variety program that ran from 1950 to 1952 and that Petrillo believes, with some justification, did not adequately compensate the union musicians involved in its production. There was a dispute. The dispute was not fully resolved on terms that Petrillo considered acceptable, and Petrillo, who does not forget professional slights any more than Sinatra does, has been notably less enthusiastic about Sinatra's projects since. This is the difficult call. Sinatra deposits the dime. He dials. He waits. Petrillo picks up on the fourth ring, which means he was not immediately at the phone, which means either he is genuinely busy or he has looked at who is calling and is deciding. "Jimmy," Sinatra says. A pause. "Frank, I owe you a conversation." Another pause. This one has a different quality, the quality of a man who was prepared for something adversarial and is now recalibrating. "Yes," Petrillo says, "you do. The CBS show, the way the musicians were compensated. I didn't do right by you on that, and I didn't do right by the people who played those sessions." The silence that follows this statement is a specific kind of silence. It is the silence of a man receiving something he did not expect and is deciding what to do with it. "No," Petrillo says finally. "You didn't. I'm going to make it right," Sinatra says. "Not because I need something from you right now. I do need something from you, but that's not why. I'm going to make it right because it was wrong, and because the musicians in this country deserve better than to be used as props for a television show and paid at a rate that treats them as props." A long silence. "What do you need from me?" Petrillo asks. And here is where Sinatra does something that requires a different kind of intelligence than strategy. He asks for something smaller than he could ask for. He does not ask Petrillo to lobby on his behalf, to use the AFM's influence to open doors, to put pressure on Columbia or MECA or anyone else. He asks for something specific and limited. He asks for a formal endorsement letter, an AFM document stating that Sinatra has been a consistent advocate for union musicians, has worked exclusively with union musicians, and is committed to union standard compensation for all future projects. It is a small thing, a single letter, an endorsement that carries by itself moderate commercial weight. But endorsements in the entertainment industry of 1952 travel. They are mentioned in negotiations. They appear in contracts as evidence of good faith. They are, in the specific ecology of reputation, seeds. And the fact that James Petrillo will write such a letter, the fact that the president of the AFM will publicly endorse Frank Sinatra at the moment when everyone else is running their spreadsheets, is itself a communication to the 14 people who are watching. "I'll have it to you by end of week," Petrillo says. "Thank you, Jimmy. Make it right with the musicians, Frank. Not to me, to them. I will." He hangs up. He checks his watch. 12:09 a.m. 38 minutes. He has made 3 calls. He has scheduled a meeting with the man who controls the most powerful talent agency in the industry, secured a formal endorsement from the president of the most powerful musicians union in the world, and established the conversation that will define the terms of the next phase of his professional life. He is not finished. He has 52 minutes remaining, and he is not the kind of man who wastes 52 minutes, but the 3 pivot points have moved. The rest is architecture. 12:09 a.m. to 1:01 a.m. Various locations. What happens in the remaining 52 minutes is not a single dramatic gesture. It is a series of precise, unhurried, entirely purposeful phone calls that are, each individually, small, and, collectively, the beginning of a rebuilding that will produce, within 18 months, the most extraordinary artistic resurrection in the history of American popular music. 12:09 a.m. Hank Sanicola, his manager. The call is brief. "We have a meeting Thursday with Jules Stein. Prepare a presentation on television production economics, 1952 to 1960. Projected, not actual. I want numbers on what the medium looks like at scale." Hank Sanicola, who has been running out of strategies for 18 months, writes this down with the energy of a man who has been given something to do. 12:14 a.m. Bill Miller, his pianist. "Bill, how many arrangements do we have that have never been recorded for Columbia?" Miller thinks. "Maybe 30, maybe more." "Good, I want a list. I want to know which ones are the best 20. "What are we doing, Frank?" "We're making a record, not for Columbia, for ourselves." A pause. "Okay," Miller says, quietly, something in his voice that is not merely professional assent. 12:21 a.m. Jimmy Van Huysen, the songwriter. "Jimmy, I need new material, not the kind Mitch Miller wants, our kind." "Frankie, I know what you're going to say. I know the commercial situation. I'm asking you to write for the music, not the market. Can you do that?" A long pause. "Yeah," Van Huysen says, "I can do that. I'll call you Thursday afternoon." 12:28 a.m. A man named Voyle Gilmore. Voyle Gilmore is a producer at Capitol Records, a smaller, younger, artistically more adventurous label than Columbia, a label that has not yet been visited by the particular institutional conservatism that has overtaken Columbia's A&R. Gilmore has reached out to Sinatra twice in the past year through intermediaries. Sinatra has not responded because responding would have meant acknowledging that Columbia might not renew, and acknowledging that would have been read as desperation. He is done with that calculation. Voyle. "It's Frank Sinatra." A pause that contains, quite audibly, the specific quality of a man receiving something he had stopped expecting. "Frank, hello. You reached out earlier this year, through Hank. I'm following up." Yes, absolutely. What are you thinking?" I'm thinking about what recording could sound like if the arrangement served the song instead of the market. I'm thinking about an album that sounds like one thing, not 12 separate songs, but one thing, a whole. I'm thinking about what happens when you give a voice room to be honest, instead of commercial. Frank, Gilmore says, and his voice has changed, the professional caution replaced by something more unguarded. I've been thinking about the exact same thing. Then we should talk, Sinatra says. Thursday at 2, if you can make it to New York. I'll be there. 1:01 a.m., October 18th, 1952. The corner of 52nd Street and 7th Avenue. He hangs up the phone. He steps out of the booth. The rain has stopped. The sidewalk is wet and reflects the streetlights, the cold, clear reflection of a city that has continued its business entirely uninterrupted by everything that has just happened inside a phone booth. He puts his hat on. He straightens his coat. He stands on the corner for a moment, not because there is anything left to do tonight, but because he is the kind of man who allows himself briefly to inhabit the weight of a moment before he moves on from it. In the past 90 minutes, he has called Ava Gardner and told her the truth about the night. Secured a Thursday meeting with Jules Stein of MCA. Secured an AFM endorsement letter from James Petrillo. Given Hank Sanicola a specific task that will restore his manager's professional momentum. Given Bill Miller a direction that will reconnect his pianist to the work that matters. Called Jimmy Van Heusen back to the music that is theirs. Opened a door at Capitol Records that has been waiting to be opened for a year. He has not solved all 13 problems. He has not confronted Mitch Miller. He has not called Dor Shari. He has not addressed the structural changes in the music industry that are real and will not be reversed by phone calls. He has done something more important. He has identified the 3 load-bearing walls of his professional architecture: the relationship with a major agency, the relationship with the union community, and the relationship with a new record label that will allow him to make the music he has been prevented from making, and he has placed, tonight, the first stones of the reconstruction. The Thursday meeting with Jules Stein will produce, 6 weeks later, a renegotiated relationship with MCA that will put Sinatra's film career back in active pursuit. Not the dramatic films he wants most, but the dramatic films he needs right now, and the meeting will eventually produce the role of Maggio in From Here to Eternity, which he will pursue with an intensity that surprises everyone who has decided he is finished. The AFM endorsement letter will circulate in the entertainment community in the way such things circulate, not dramatically, but consistently, appearing in conversations and negotiations as a signal that the conventional narrative of Sinatra in decline has at least one powerful counter-narrative attached to it. The call to Voyle Gilmore at Capitol Records will produce, over the following year, the negotiation of a new recording contract and, in 1953, the beginning of the Capitol years, the Songs for Young Lovers sessions, the Swing Easy sessions, and, in 1955, In the Wee Small Hours, the album that is widely considered the first concept album in the history of recorded popular music that will change the way the record industry thinks about what an album can be. None of this is knowable at 1:01 a.m. on October 18, 1952. What is knowable is this. Frank Sinatra stands on the corner of 52nd Street, and the city is wet and cold and indifferent, and somewhere across town, Mitch Miller is sleeping the sleep of a man who believes he has won, and 13 pragmatists are running their spreadsheets on a man they have decided is finished. And the man they have decided is finished is standing on a corner, having spent 90 minutes building the foundation of what comes next. He flags a cab, he gets in, he gives the driver an address. The cab moves into the New York night. Frank Sinatra looks out the window at the city, at the lit windows and the wet streets and the specific American machinery of a city that has never stopped for any one man's difficulty. And he thinks about Thursday. He is not thinking about tonight. Tonight is already the past. He is thinking about Thursday and the meeting with Jules Stein and the things he will say that he has been waiting to say and the argument he will make with his whole self, not just his voice, but his thinking, his analysis, his architectural understanding of where the medium is going and why he is the right man to take it there. He is thinking about the album he is going to make, the one that sounds like one thing, like a whole, like the interior life of a man who has been through something and come out the other side, not diminished but deepened. He is thinking about what comes next. He is 36 years old, and he is thinking about what comes next. October 23rd, 1952, 10 a.m. MCA offices, New York. Jules Stein is at his desk when Sinatra arrives. Hank Sanicola is with Sinatra. He has spent the past 6 days preparing the presentation Sinatra requested. The numbers on television economics are, as Sinatra suspected they would be, compelling in ways that the conventional industry wisdom has not yet absorbed. The meeting lasts 2 hours and 11 minutes. The agreement they reach is not signed this morning. These things require lawyers and language and the specific patience of professionals, but the shape of it is clear by noon. MCA will actively pursue dramatic film roles for Sinatra. The target is prestige dramatic work, not genre pictures, not comedies, but roles that demonstrate the full range of a voice that has been largely confined to musicals. The specific target, which Sinatra identifies in the meeting, is a role in the film adaptation of From Here to Eternity, which Columbia Pictures is developing. He wants the role of Angelo Maggio. He believes he is right for it. He is willing to take a fraction of his normal salary to get it. Jules Stein looks at him for a long moment. That's a significant financial concession, Frank. I know what I'm doing, Sinatra says. What if they say no? They won't, Sinatra says. Not as braggadocio, as calculation. He has read the script. He has read the character. He knows, with the specific certainty of a man whose instrument is human emotion, that he is the only person who can play Angelo Maggio the way Angelo Maggio needs to be played. They won't. Stein looks at Hank Sanicola. Sanicola gives a slight, confirming nod, not of certainty, but of trust in the man making the claim. All right, Stein says, I'll put it in motion. The 13 people who stepped back from Frank Sinatra's professional life in 1952 were, as noted, not enemies. They were pragmatists, and pragmatists respond to changed calculations. Over the following 18 months, the calculations changed. The AFM endorsement letter circulated. Voyle Gilmore's meeting produced a serious conversation about a Capitol Records contract. The Capitol contract was signed in March 1953, the first recording session under the new contract. 4 songs for the Songs for Young Lovers EP, arranged by Nelson Riddle, took place in November 1953. The arranger who would become his defining musical collaborator, the sound that would define the second and greatest phase of his career, the partnership that produced the greatest popular recordings in the history of American music. It began in a recording studio in Los Angeles in November 1953, with material that was the music he had been prevented from making, the arrangements that were built around the voice as it actually was, rather than the voice as commerce wished it to be. In February 1953, Lou Wasserman called Frank Sinatra's agent to say that Columbia Pictures had agreed to test him for the role of Angelo Maggio in From Here to Eternity. He took the test. He read the scene. He was Angelo Maggio, not because he acted the character, but because he was the character, in the specific way that only happens when a performer has lived something close enough to the material to have no separation between self and role. He was cast in the film. He was paid $8,000, approximately 5% of his normal asking price. He did not care. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for that performance. On March 25, 1954, he held the Oscar in his hands, and he was not thinking about 1952. He was already in 1955. He was already in the Wee Small Hours sessions. He was already in the room with Nelson Riddle and Bill Miller and the orchestra that would record the album that changed what albums were. The 13 pragmatists, each of them, in their own time and their own way, revised their spreadsheets. 2 of them, years later, mentioned in interviews or in private correspondence that they had underestimated what they were looking at in 1952, that they had seen the numbers and missed the man, that they had calculated the trajectory and failed to account for the variable that cannot be calculated, the specific quality of a person who, when they are on the floor, does not lie there waiting for someone to help them up. They get up themselves. They make the calls. The word comeback is almost right. The word implies that something was lost and then found again, that Sinatra returned to what he had been, that the 1954 version was a restoration of the 1947 version. This is incorrect. What happened between 1952 and 1954 is not a restoration. It is a transformation. The man who walked out of Columbia Records in October 1952 was a man with a beautiful voice and commercial instincts and a 20-year body of work that was, by any standard of popular art, significant. The man who walked into Capitol Records in November 1953 was different. He was the same person, yes, same history, same relationships, same fundamental character, but the voice was different, not worse, deeper, not less, more. The year of decline had done to his voice what time and difficulty do to good wood. It had taken out the youth and left something with more grain, more weight, more truth. And the vision was different. The man who recorded Bim Bam Baby for Mitch Miller was a man trying to satisfy a market that had moved away from him. The man who sat down with Voyle Gilmore and Nelson Riddle and said, "I want to make something that sounds like one thing, like a whole." That man was no longer trying to satisfy a market. He was trying to make something true. This is what the 90 minutes in the phone booth were actually about. Not strategy, not revenge on the 13 pragmatists, not a tactical response to institutional decline. They were about deciding, with full consciousness and in the specific clarity of the corner of 52nd Street at midnight, with the October rain just ending and the city indifferent and enormous around him, what kind of artist he was going to be. He had two choices. He could spend the next 5 years trying to re-become what he had been, trying to recover the commercial position, trying to win back the market, trying to prove to the 13 pragmatists that their spreadsheets were wrong by matching himself to their categories. Or he could spend the next 5 years building something that had never existed before. He chose the second thing. And the 90-minute phone call session on October 17, 1952, was the moment of that choice. Not the calls themselves, but what the calls represented. The decision to use his relationships not to recover lost ground, but to build new ground. To call Jules Stein not to re-enter the old architecture, but to propose a new one. To call Jimmy Petrillo not to restore a damaged alliance, but to repair a wrong he had done. To call Voyle Gilmore not because Capitol was the next best option, but because Capitol was the right option for the music he wanted to make. The 13 pragmatists were calculating the decline of Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra was calculating the construction of something they couldn't see yet. He was right and they were wrong, and the difference was 90 minutes on a wet Manhattan corner. In the wee small hours of the morning, was released in April 1955. It was the first album in the history of recorded popular music explicitly conceived as a unified artistic statement, not a collection of songs, but a single, sustained emotional experience, structured like a novel, arranged like a symphony, performed with the specific authority of a man who has lived in the territory the music describes. The album reached number 2 on the Billboard charts. It was certified gold. It was reviewed by the music press with the vocabulary normally reserved for classical recordings. Critics struggled to find a precedent for what it was, because there was no precedent. Frank Sinatra recorded it at the age of 39, 7 years after the Bobby Soxers, 3 years after the recording session at Columbia that he walked out of and did not go back to. The 13 pragmatists watched what happened from 1953 to 1960 and revised their calculations. Some of them found ways to say, privately, that they had been wrong. Most of them simply adjusted their behavior without comment, because this is what pragmatists do when the numbers change. Mitch Miller continued at Columbia until 1965. He is remembered primarily for his sing-along series and for the institutional conservatism that caused him to reject the early work of Bob Dylan. He is not remembered fondly by the people who cared about what was possible. James Petrillo received, in addition to the formal apology, a private benefit performance by Sinatra for the AFM's Musician Welfare Fund, unreported and unannounced, in December 1952. 12 musicians were in the audience. The performance lasted 2 hours. Voyle Gilmore and Nelson Riddle produced 13 albums with Sinatra between 1953 and 1961. They are among the finest recordings in the history of American music. The phone booth at the corner of 52nd Street and 7th Avenue was removed when the building was renovated in 1961. The 90 minutes happened in it anyway. People ask me about the comeback. I don't know what they mean. I never left. I just made some calls. Frank Sinatra, interview 1956. They said he was finished. 13 of them. Not enemies, that would have been easier. Pragmatists, reasonable people with reasonable spreadsheets, looking at reasonable numbers and reaching the reasonable conclusion that a career in decline does not recover. They were correct about the numbers. They were wrong about the man. The man went to a phone booth on a wet October corner and deposited a dime and made the first of 7 calls, and in 90 minutes laid the foundation for the greatest artistic achievement of his life. Not by fighting the 13, not by proving the 13 wrong, by building something that made the question of whether they were right or wrong irrelevant. This is the thing about real power, the kind that is not inherited, not purchased, not taken by force, but built, day by day, call by call, relationship by relationship, genuine human connection by genuine human connection. It survives the floor. When everything falls and you are on the ground and 13 pragmatists are running their spreadsheets on your decline, real power does not wait to be rescued. It does not wait for the market to turn, or the critics to reconsider, or the institutions to revise their estimates. It finds a phone booth. It deposits a dime. It makes the calls, and 90 minutes later, the foundation has been laid. The rest is music. You make the calls, the rest takes care of itself. Frank Sinatra, Private Conversation, 1957, as recounted by Hank Sanicola.